Welcome to part 2 of our podcast series called VA Social Justice Podcast, COVID-19 and Educational Inequities, the Impacts and Solutions, to gather more insights on our Sustainable Development Goals, which are quality education and no poverty. Students conducted interviews with Pacts and Solutions. In this part of our podcast, you will hear excerpts from student interviews.
Students conducted interviews with the NYC First Deputy Chancellor Donald Collier, District 27 Superintendent Jennifer Carrion, Village Academy Principal Dr. Doris Lee, and PSQ 253 Principal Phoebe Robinson. In the beginning of our process, we also listened to remarks by the permanent representative of South Africa to the United Nations, Madhu Johini.
So we are delighted that the City of New York, through the Mayor's Office, is supporting important programs of this nature, which prepare youth, yourselves, our global leaders of tomorrow, to start taking an active interest in pressing global issues and challenges of the day. And I was quite taken up by the fact that your vision statement, which looks at yourselves, but within your community, and start taking up these issues, important issues within your communities. And I also, the project, I think it was Ariana or Joanna who talked about the project that you have on the impact of COVID-19 on educational institutions, not only in New York City, but in the US and globally, is an important one. Just think about it. Think about the impact of this COVID-19 on a child in a rural village in my country or a rural village in India. So as you focus on this project, broaden up the space. As you think about children in New York City, children in the US, think about children across the globe. So it'll be interesting to see what you come up with.
Students asked questions about how homeless students have been impacted by COVID-19. We know from our research that this was an issue that needed to be addressed. Let's listen to what was discussed.
The question is, when elementary schools opened back up, how did you accommodate homeless students? Which we learned represented 1 in 10 NYC public school students.
That's a really important question, right? Because our students in temporary housing, students identified as homeless, students who are in transient and ever-shifting communities, really required us to put on our boots, literally, with the restriction, of course, and try to go find them. We had a team actually working as far as outreach and constant calling to find our kids. Myself and my AP, even though, attendance teachers weren't permitted to go on home visits, myself and my AP, we literally went to the buildings knocking on doors to find our kids. So that's one of the first aspects in terms of just trying to accommodate them. We needed to find them.
We discovered that 1 out of every 10 New York City public school kids, around 100,000 individuals, is homeless or living in unstable housing. What is Village Academy doing to help these students achieve their goals?
Right. So Village Academy actually has a higher percentage of students in temporary housing than New York City and the other schools in Far Rockaway. And that's because of the inequities that you guys have been learning about in terms of access to quality education for your parents or your caregivers before you, equity in the job market, and a host of other effects that impact us because of our race. Now, what does Village Academy do? There's a couple of things that we do and that we're going to continue to do. Each student in temporary housing, we provide their uniforms for free. So we give them all of their uniforms so that they don't have to worry about purchasing a uniform. Also, wearing a uniform means that you don't have to worry about, as a middle schooler, having the latest clothes because everyone's wearing the same thing. In the fall, I have advocated for the entire school year and have 2 washers and dryers coming to Village Academy. So students are going to be able to wash their clothes and dry them right at the school, and parents will have access to that. I'm also working with Emblem Health to bring a dentist office to Village Academy so that our students who are in temporary housing who may not have access, or their parents might be overwhelmed trying to get things back together, because no matter what, your parent wants the best for you. So whatever they're going through, we're going to try to support them. So we have the healthcare clinic already, and then we're going to try to bring a dental office to Village Academy. So you'll be able to get your teeth cleaned, cavities filled, teeth pulled, like a real dental office right in the school. Something else that we're doing to support our students in temporary housing, well, one thing that we did is that if their parents couldn't pick up the computer because they were in the Bronx or in another part of Queens or in Brooklyn because they had to go to a shelter, is that we delivered the computer to them. Like, we drove out and we delivered it to them. So we're going to continue to find ways to make sure that our students have access to what they need. We're also working on, I am right now in talks trying to get a food pantry at Village Academy so that families who need it could come on a weekly basis and get food.
My classmates and I read an article that said that there are 25,000 homeless students in New York City schools, and many had issues with technology during remote learning. How will schools in District 27 provide academic and social emotional support to students who are failing throughout remote learning?
Did you say failing? Failing, yes. So thank you for that question, Linnea. It's something that we know there has been, right, inequities with technology. And I know your principal, Dr. Lee, has always shared with me that in the Rockaways, there's been connectivity issues, right? Even if you have Wi-Fi, the towers, the cell phone towers, are not as functional, right, as in other parts of New York City. So we've written to the local elected officials about that. Our executive superintendent is aware. I've mentioned it to her, and I've also escalated that issue to the director for instructional technology in Queens, and they're aware of it. So that's been definitely a gap. So throughout this time of the pandemic, we've asked our principals and assistant principals to be ready for other supports, other learning supports that don't require technology and a reliance on technology during remote learning. So they would have had to come up with the old school, right, textbook, paper option, because the reality is we couldn't rely on just technology, because if you remember last year, schools didn't have devices for every student, and there was a huge push. It took about 4 months for the city to really try to catch up with the demands of the devices. And then some of the schools, even if they gave out devices last spring, they were already pretty much, they didn't have a good lifespan, right? As you know, because some of the devices were pretty flimsy, and that also contributed to the learning loss, right? So
students ask questions about the social and emotional impacts of COVID-19. Listen to the questions and answers that were provided based on this issue.
We know that students need that social emotional support. So that's why we do have wellness checks in place. We also have a self-care series even for your teachers, because the reality is your teachers are also feeling that decline in their own mental health, and they're also feeling stress. So we know that if teachers and adults are feeling this way, imagine how it is for children, right? For students and teenagers especially, because you thrive on social interaction, right? You thrive on all of that, and you don't have the supports of a teacher coming up right next to you to help you with your learning. So in District 27, the plan is to make sure that all of our principals embed social emotional learning within their design for their school. So I know that Dr. Lee has done a great job with that, and your colleague school downstairs, MS53, they also have, something called brain power and wellness checks embedded within their schedule. So it's really important that we take those breaks, right? And that we make sure that our students look like they are happy, right? Look like they are ready. And there's also a lot more social workers and guidance counselors in place. So we're also using them to check in on all of our students. It's your mental health is the most important thing right now, to make sure that you're okay and that you'll be ready emotionally to come back to in-person learning. But
Thank you for your response. I would also like to agree with you because I was one of the few students who went through emotional stress during quarantine and remote learning. I never really got in to see any of my friends, talk to my friends, socialize with other kids my age. So it really took a toll on me during quarantine. So I think that this school year will be great for guidance counselors and everything else is teachers to emotionally support their students, because kids need that interaction with other people, because it will upgrade their mental health and it will make them feel happy next year.
New York City First Deputy Chancellor Conyers addressed what DOE is doing to help teachers, students, and families with their social emotional needs. Listen to what he has to say.
So, over the last year, there were certain things that educators received. For example, trauma-informed professional learning development, so they would understand how to deal with trauma. They were given even written documents that talk about a bridge to practice as it relates to social emotional wellness. We have been dealing with social emotional wellness not just during COVID, even before COVID. To add to that, we've been resourced in such a good way, meaning that I know that there are going to be an additional 500, I believe, social workers, additional guidance counselors added to schools. We also are encouraging and reminding principal leaders. Principals are very important in this return and success for students as well. Reminding principals that they have the opportunity to continue to create those circles, those restorative circles, to have small talk groups, to ensure that students have the ability to have their voices heard.
Understanding the needs of ENL students and students with disabilities is very important. My peers asked questions about these issues. Listen to what school leaders had to say.
I read a Chartbeat article entitled "For NYC Students Learning English, Remote Learning Can Come with Steep Barriers." This article brought up the fact that many students who were not fluent in English had issues during remote learning because they had fewer opportunities to practice. My parents are not fluent in English, and that impacts my younger sister. What is the DOE doing to make sure students like my sister are able to return back to school and have additional support in learning English in September?
All right, so now once they get back in school, all schools should have and must have services for students that you would call ENL or English, students that have limited proficiency in English. That opportunity that you talked about, that the article spoke about, to practice, to be part of an environment where you get the ability to practice talking, to have even tangible art items that you can learn about what they are, where the origin of them, what the significance is. All of that happens when you're in a setting where the teacher is better able to do a few things, to have you discuss, to have you think about things, to have you lead, even in conversation. It's hard even now for me to be talking to you through this medium right now. I would much prefer to be sitting with you, right? And the chances of better interaction, better discussion, it increases when we are together.
Hello, Dr. Lee. We learned that distance learning has caused a significant setback in achievement, particularly among Black and Hispanic students, as well as students with disabilities. How do you plan to help students with disabilities at Village Academy get any extra help they need to succeed in the upcoming school year?
Well, thanks, Tori. The first thing I'm going to do is make sure that they're seen, because I feel like during the pandemic, sometimes students are not as engaged or are not able to build a deeper relationship because their cameras are off, and it's hard to get to know someone when you can't see them. So that's the first thing that I'm going to do, is make sure that all of my students, especially students with disabilities, are seen and known by teachers. The second thing is to continue to maintain high expectations. It's hard to like go to your house and turn on your camera, or go to your house and make sure you complete an assignment. But when you're in school with us, I can make sure that I'm able to maintain the high expectations that I have for you, whether or not you have an IEP. And then, of course, we're going to have opportunities for morning school and after school. And then one thing that makes Village Academy really special is our strategic reading period. So that's also going to help, because every student, whether or not they have an IEP, is going to get small group instruction in reading if they need it.
We all thank you so much for your time, Dr. Lee, and for providing us with very useful information for our podcast series. Would you like to make a final comment?
Yes, I would. I'm really proud of the work that you guys have been doing in terms of this podcast. This podcast is going to be essential in terms of awareness. And you might not be able to write policy right now, and you might not be able to change the access that some students have based on their race, but you are letting people know what some great practices are, what's happening in your school. And by raising awareness, once you know something, then you're accountable for it, right? So if you know something isn't right, then you are accountable to doing the right thing. You can't use the excuse that I didn't know. So the work that you guys are doing is very, very, very important. And I hope that you're learning a lot about quality education. And I hope that you're learning to advocate for yourself. That's the biggest thing. That's what I always tell you guys. If you want a club, write me a letter, ask for a meeting. Okay, if your teacher's not helping you, if I'm not helping you, anything that you feel like you deserve as a student, you need to advocate for it. You want a sports club, advocate for it. You want new science equipment, advocate for it. Ask for it, demand it in a respectful way, so you have access to a quality education. Because what you guys are telling me based on your question is that if you're Black or Hispanic and you have a low socioeconomic level, that you don't have access to the same quality of education as other kids. And that's not fair. So you have the right to demand that you get the same. Because when I was growing up, I grew up in Vanderveer Projects in Brooklyn, New York, and I did not have access to a quality education, and I did not know that I could advocate. At that time, I thought children had to be quiet, and I didn't get what I needed from elementary school or middle school. So I'm letting you know that you have a right to ask your teacher to drop a letter off in my office and let me know whether or not you understand what's happening in any one of your classes. And it's not to get your teachers in trouble, because they're adults. They can't get in trouble, okay? They can only get support. And then that's going to be my job to go work with them to make sure that you're learning what you need to learn. And if you feel like the school is anything unsafe, if you don't have enough incentive, if you don't have enough activities, you need to let me know. You need to say, listen, we deserve this. How are you going to provide this for us? And then it's on me to try to figure it out. I might come back to you and ask you for help and ask your parents for help, because I can't do it all alone. But make sure you are demanding in middle school, in high school, in college, and in life that you have access to whatever anyone else has. You have a right to it too.
A group of us had an opportunity to reflect on some key points made by the speakers that were interviewed. Listen in to what we had to say.
The school official remade some important points about COVID-19 and what steps they are taking to support students who return back to school.
Our district, which is 27, is putting programs in place such as additional social workers and giving not only students supports but also teachers. Superintendent Carrion understands the needs of all students, including those with learning challenges. She addressed how our school and others are taking the lead to ensure that students are engaged in real learning opportunities.
I was really excited to learn that First Counselor Donald Conyers is from Far Rockaway. He went to PS 42, not far from here. and he is committed to making sure that we as New York City students receive all the support we need. I am excited for him to possibly visit our school in person next school year.
Interesting to hear the perspective of both Principal Dr. Lee and Principal Robinson. They are making sure that students feel comfortable returning back to school in September and that they continue to make academic progress.
I think we all agree that the quicker we as students can return back to in-person learning, the better off we will be.
I also hope that countries such as El Salvador, Jamaica, and South Africa, which are all countries we refer to this podcast, will get the resources they need to make sure students can return back to school in September.
Thank you for joining us and listening to our podcast series. Thank you to our principal, Dr. Lee, and Assistant Principal Harris and Bailey, and our teachers for making this opportunity possible. Thank you also to all our invited guest speakers, the NYC Mayor's Office, the UN Junior Ambassador Program, South African Ambassador Joyini Matu, NYC First Deputy Chancellor Donald Conyers, District 27 Superintendent Jennifer Carrion, PSU 53 Principal Phoebe Robinson.
We hope you will join us for Series 2 of the VA Social Justice Podcast, which will be released in the 2021 through 2022 school year.